The grand hall of the Zenari royal court shimmered with an ethereal, golden light, cast by bioluminescent crystals embedded into the high, vaulted ceilings. Elias Carter stood at the center of the chamber, acutely aware of the dozens of faceless figures surrounding him. The Zenari nobles, their features obscured by elaborate veils of shimmering fabric, regarded him in silence. Their alien forms, humanoid but unerringly perfect in posture and grace, exuded an air of quiet authority. At the far end of the hall, seated on an elevated throne, was Princess Zayara. She wore the most intricate veil of all, a silken cascade of silver threads that caught the golden light and refracted it in dazzling patterns. No one had ever seen her face, not even her most trusted advisors. To do so was to claim a bond more sacred than any Zenari vow, one that would tether their souls for eternity. Elias straightened his suit jacket, trying not to let his unease show. As a human ambassador and xenobiologist, he had faced countless alien dignitaries in his career, but none quite like the Zenari. Their customs were as rigid as they were mysterious, and the weight of representing Earth in these negotiations pressed heavily on his shoulders. From behind her veil, Zayara's voice resonated, low and melodic, yet carrying a sharp edge of authority. Ambassador Carter, the Zenari do not entertain mediators lightly. We trust you understand the gravity of your position here. Elias inclined his head respectfully. I do, Your Highness. I'm here to ensure our mutual survival. Her veiled head tilted slightly, as though she were studying him. For a moment, the silence in the hall grew oppressive. Then she spoke again, her tone softer, almost contemplative. We shall see if you are as steadfast as you claim, human. As the audience concluded, Elias couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward the princess. Her voice lingered in his mind, as did the sense of something unsaid, a tension that hung between them like a thread waiting to be tugged. Back in his quarters, he stared at the photo of his wife on his desk. Julia's smile, once warm and full of promise, now felt like a distant memory. Their marriage, strained by the demands of their diplomatic careers, had grown cold and perfunctory. The emotional distance between them was a chasm he didn't know how to bridge. Setting up the cultural conflict 300 words. The next morning, Elias attended a briefing with the Zenari Council. Their faceless forms made it difficult to read their emotions, but their words carried clear warnings. Ambassador Carter, one of the elders, began, his voice deliberate and measured. You are an outsider, and as such, there are boundaries you must not cross. Chief among them is your interaction with Her Highness. Another council member leaned forward, their veil shimmering. The princess's face is not merely concealed for privacy. To see it is to bind yourself to her soul, a bond deeper than any human marriage, one that transcends time and space. Elias nodded, though the explanation left him unsettled. The Zenari culture was rich with ritual and symbolism, but the intensity of this particular tradition struck him as almost oppressive. Understood, he said, keeping his tone neutral. As the meeting ended, Elias found himself wandering through the palace gardens, a serene expanse of alien flora that glowed faintly in the dim light. He couldn't shake the image of Zayara from his mind. Not her appearance, for he hadn't seen it, but the way she had spoken. Her voice had carried layers of emotion. Power, yes, but also something softer. Loneliness, perhaps. He had seen it before, in leaders burdened by their responsibilities. But with Zayara, it felt different. There was a vulnerability beneath her regal exterior, a yearning she kept carefully hidden. Elias's curiosity grew, despite the warnings. What was it about her that intrigued him so deeply? And why did he feel as though her veiled gaze could see through him in a way no one else ever had? The inciting incident, 400 words. The negotiations began in earnest that evening, a tense meeting between the Zenari Council and Elias. The topic was an alliance against a looming threat from a neighboring star system, but the discussion was fraught with cultural misunderstandings and unspoken distrust. As the talks dragged on, Zayara finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Ambassador Carter, your people speak of loyalty, yet your actions suggest otherwise. How can we trust humanity when you struggle to trust even one another?" Her words struck a nerve. Elias stiffened, his jaw tightening. "With respect, Your Highness, trust is earned, not given freely. Even in your own society, I see walls built to keep others out." A hushed murmur rippled through the room, the Zenari nobles shifting uncomfortably at the implied criticism. But Zayara didn't falter. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her veiled face angled toward Elias. "And yet you stand here, seeking an alliance. Is it loyalty you offer, or necessity?" The room fell silent. Elias held her veiled gaze, the tension between them palpable. Her words were a challenge, but beneath them lay something more, a question directed at him, not as a diplomat, but as a man. Later that night, back in his quarters, Elias replayed the exchange in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that Zayara had seen through him in a way no one else had. Her challenge had been pointed, yes, but there had also been an undercurrent of understanding, as though she recognized his own doubts and fears. As he mulled over the day's events, a soft chime interrupted his thoughts. His datapad blinked with an incoming message, encrypted and untraceable. Hesitant, he opened it. The message contained only a single line. "Do you dare to see without sight?" Elias stared at the words, his heart pounding. He knew the implications of responding, the risk he would be taking. But the pull towards Zayara was stronger than his fear. Something about her called to him, a siren song he couldn't ignore. With a deep breath, he typed his reply, "Yes." Elias slipped into the dimly lit chamber, his heart pounding. The corridor behind him was silent, the guard stationed far enough away that his movements went unnoticed. The air in Princess Zayara's quarters was warm, almost stifling, filled with the faint scent of an alien flower he couldn't name. "Close the door behind you," came her voice, soft yet commanding. He obeyed, turning to see her seated on a low platform surrounded by cascading drapes of deep purple fabric. The room was bathed in shadows, with only faint golden light emanating from the bioluminescent crystals embedded in the walls. Zayara was cloaked in her veil, her figure obscured but undeniably regal. "You came," she said, her tone carrying a trace of amusement. "I wasn't sure what to expect," Elias admitted, stepping closer. Zayara gestured for him to sit, and he hesitated before lowering himself onto a cushion opposite her. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, yet strangely intimate. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. Elias arched a brow. "And what did you expect? A human who cared only for political gain. But you," she paused, her veiled face tilting slightly, "you carry a burden, one you hide well, but not from me." Her words unsettled him, striking too close to truths he rarely admitted, even to himself. "And what about you?" he asked. Behind all this, he gestured to the veils, the walls, the formality of her court. "What do you carry?" Zayara's voice softened, the weight of 1,000 expectations, a loneliness so profound it has become my only companion. Their conversation turned reflective, almost philosophical. Zayara asked, Do you think it is possible to truly see someone without knowing their face? Elias hesitated, then answered honestly, I don't know, but maybe that's what we all want. Someone who can see us for who we are, not what we show the world. Her silence felt like agreement, and for the first time, Elias saw the fragility beneath her regal exterior. The growing intimacy, 400 words. Over the following nights, Elias found himself returning to Zayara's chamber. Each meeting felt like stepping into a world apart, a cocoon of shadows and whispers where the outside universe ceased to exist. Zayara began to share more about her world and its customs, her words painting vivid images of a culture bound by rigid traditions. To reveal my face, she explained one night, is not just an act of vulnerability. It is a binding, a merging of souls for my people. It is the most intimate connection we can offer, far beyond physical touch. Elias listened intently, the weight of her words settling over him. And you've never shown your face to anyone, he asked. No, she replied, her voice carrying a hint of sadness. And I may never. To do so would mean surrendering a part of myself, something I cannot take back. The thought lingered in Elias's mind, intertwining with his own struggles. Slowly, he began to open up to her as well, speaking of his life on Earth and the growing void in his marriage. My wife and I, he admitted one evening, used to be partners in every sense of the word. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other. Now it's like we're strangers living under the same roof. Zayara listened in silence, her veiled presence a steady comfort. Perhaps, she said gently, what you seek cannot be found in her because you have stopped seeking it in yourself. Her words stung with their truth, but they also awakened something in him, a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. During one of their conversations, Zayara reached out and touched his hand, her slender fingers cool against his skin. The gesture was simple, yet it carried a significance that made his breath catch. In my culture, she said softly, this would be considered an act of trust. Elias's gaze lingered on her hand. And what does it mean for you? Her pause was long, deliberate. It means that, for the first time in a very long time, I am not alone. The connection between them grew, an unspoken desire simmering beneath their words. They both knew the consequences of acting on it, but the pull was undeniable. The infidelity arc, 300 words. Elias lay awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling. The weight of what he was doing pressed heavily on him. He hadn't touched Zayara beyond that single, fleeting moment, but the emotional intimacy they shared was undeniable. He thought of Julia, his wife. Their relationship had been eroding for years, but this was something different. He was seeking comfort in another, someone who made him feel seen in a way Julia no longer did. Was it betrayal? The question gnawed at him. He wanted to convince himself that it wasn't, that this connection with Zayara was harmless, even necessary. But deep down he knew better. Zayara, too, wrestled with her own turmoil. Each time she met with Elias, she felt herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. He was different from the Zenari nobles who surrounded her. Unpredictable, flawed, yet undeniably genuine. But her actions carried risks far greater than her own reputation. If the bond between them became known, it could unravel everything she had worked to protect. One night, as they sat in the soft glow of her chamber, Elias reached out impulsively, his hand moving toward her veil. I need to see you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zayara's hand shot up, catching his wrist. Not yet, she said firmly, though her voice trembled. Elias withdrew, the tension between them crackling like static. I don't know what we're doing, he admitted. Zayara's response was quiet, almost a whisper. Neither do I. But whatever it is, it cannot go further, not now. Despite her words, the bond between them only deepened, a fragile thread that held them both in its thrall. The grand hall of the Zenari Palace erupted into chaos as the explosion shattered the serene glow of the bioluminescent crystals. Screams echoed as courtiers scattered in panic, their veiled forms darting into the shadows. Smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating, as Elias staggered forward, his instincts propelling him toward the dais where Zayara sat. She was standing, her figure silhouetted against the flames consuming the edge of the chamber. A lone figure emerged from the smoke, weapon raised, a would-be assassin determined to strike down the princess. "Zayara!" Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The assassin turned, but Elias was faster. He tackled the figure to the ground, wresting the weapon away as a searing pain shot through his side. Blood blossomed on his shirt, but he didn't falter. The weapon clattered to the floor, and the assassin fled into the smoke. Zayara rushed to him, her voice trembling with urgency. "You're hurt." Before he could respond, she pulled him into a hidden passageway behind the throne. The door sealed shut, muffling the sounds of panic outside. They were alone in a dimly lit chamber, the air heavy with tension. Elias sank to the floor, his breath shallow. Blood seeped through his fingers as he clutched his wound. "I think this is it," he murmured, his voice laced with both pain and resignation. "Don't say that," Zayara said, kneeling beside him. "You'll live. I'll make sure of it." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but insistent. "If I'm going to die," he said, his voice breaking, "let me die knowing you. Let me see you." Zayara froze, her breath hitching. "Elias, please," he whispered. "I need to see you. Just once." Her hands trembled as they moved to her veil. Torn between her duty and the emotions she had tried so hard to suppress, she hesitated for only a moment before lifting the fabric away. For the first time, Elias saw her face. The psychic bond 300 words. The moment Zayara's veil fell, a wave of emotion crashed over Elias, unlike anything he had ever experienced. Her face was radiant, otherworldly in its beauty, but it was her eyes that held him captive, deep pools of light and shadow that seemed to pierce through every layer of his being. A connection ignited between them, more profound than anything physical. Memories flooded his mind. Zayara as a child, isolated by her station, the crushing weight of her responsibilities, the quiet yearning she had carried for years. He felt her pain as though it were his own, her loneliness an echo of his own struggles. Zayara gasped, her hand reaching for him. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Everything. Your strength, your sorrow, your love." The bond was euphoric and devastating, a merging of their souls that transcended words. For a brief moment they were one, their emotions laid bare. Elias felt the depth of Zayara's feelings for him, her love tempered by the knowledge of its impossibility. Zayara's voice trembled. "I've bound myself to you, Elias. There's no going back now." He reached for her face, his hand trembling. "Zayara, I've never felt anything like this." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "Neither have I, and I fear I never will again." The bond was a revelation and a curse, a connection that would tether them forever, even as their realities pulled them apart. The aftermath, 300 words. Elias awoke days later in a medical bay, his wound bandaged but his heart heavy. Zayara was gone, her duties pulling her back into the public eye to reassure her people after the assassination attempt. When he returned to Earth, the consequences of his actions awaited him. Julia confronted him in their home, her expression a mixture of hurt and anger. "I know," she said simply, holding up his datapad. The encrypted messages between him and Zayara glared back at him from the screen. Elias tried to explain, his words faltering. It wasn't what you think. Julia's voice broke as she interrupted him. You found in her what you stopped looking for in me. Her words cut deeper than any wound. She was right, and he couldn't deny it. Despite his apologies, their marriage was irreparably damaged. Julia packed her things and left, leaving Elias alone with his guilt. Meanwhile, Zayara faced her own reckoning. The Zenari Council was furious, their trust in her shaken. While she retained her title, whispers of her betrayal spread through the court. Her people saw her bond with a human as a violation of their sacred traditions, a weakness unbecoming of a ruler. Elias and Zayara met one final time in a secluded corner of the Zenari Palace. The bond between them was still strong, an unspoken connection that neither could sever. We can't go back, Zayara said, her voice heavy with sorrow. No, Elias agreed, but I'll carry you with me, always. As they parted, their eyes lingered, the weight of their shared memories a bittersweet ache. They were bound forever, yet destined to remain worlds apart. A love forged in shadows, destined to exist only in the spaces between.